I feel we must add thanks to Montezuma, whose products are in the green room. You know what I'm talking about. It is a cliche to say that someone needs no introduction. On this occasion, it is perhaps true, but I'm going to do it anyway. Dame Vikki Heywood has been Executive Director of the RSC. Correct me if I'm wrong. Joint Chief Executive at the Royal Court. Executive producer of many wonderful commercial shows. I was tempted to say commercial shows, including Matilda. What an extraordinary thing that is. Chair of the RSA from 2012 to 2018, and in 2020 was unsurprisingly made a Dame for her services to the performing arts. So well done.
Thank you.
I was saying earlier that my wife, Kate Mosse, is only a CBE, so
yeah.
She didn't come. Vicky's sensitive, touching Veal and Ham, which, I'm doubling it up now, is a book that I read, it must be at least a year ago now, and I passed it from my own hot hand to my mother's hand, who is 96 years old, 95 then, who consumed it in about 2 hours and 3 minutes. It's a wonderful book. Thank you for coming.
You gave me the best quote. You said
oh.
She consumed it in a voluptuous gulp.
God. I should have written that on my book. Dame Harriet Walter, who received her damehood in 2011, therefore has 9 years of advance of that responsibility, has an extraordinary CV in film, TV and theatre, although we'll come later to their early career connections, which are very interesting. Proximity to great writing in film, TV and theatre is clearly catching. Some people call it a virus. Kate and I, our son, Felix, is about to publish a novel, and he's caught that virus. Anyway, proximity to great writing is clearly catching. She Speaks, which is such a great title, is her 5th book, inspired by a half-century relationship with William Shakespeare. You know the guy? Filling in some of the gaps he left in her own remarkable words, some of which we'll hear her read happily. And how does she do it? She does it with energy, wit, intelligence, and extraordinary invention. So, Vikki Heywood, Harriet Walter. I'll start with you. It's a fantastic book, She Speaks, and the obvious place to start, and it's always, as a writer, the thing that I want to know first, is what was the initial inspiration for writing this superb book?
Well, I'm sure Vikki will agree, and you, these things are sort of rise to the surface, and they've been there for a very long time. You don't know how long you've been thinking it, but I think that sort of standing on stage thinking in Shakespearean while I wasn't allowed to say anything in lots of plays over the years, sort of started to bubble these things up in my head. It was very quick to write because I think they'd all been gestating for a long time. But the trigger point for writing it was Shakespeare School's Festival, anyone know of?
Yeah.
I'm a patron, and they said they were setting up this competition for their students and school kids, where they wanted them to invent a new speech for a Shakespeare character, or invent a new character in a new play, or rethink something from Shakespeare. And it said, in the brief for the children, it said, it doesn't even have to be in words. And I thought, what is the point of studying Shakespeare if it doesn't have to be in words? You know, puppets, what are they, mime? To be or not to be, try miming that. Anyway, so I ended up, they said, would I write something as a sort of, as an example to kick them off? And I thought, oh, right, you know. And I immediately thought of Gertrude, who I'd watched from the wings as playing Ophelia, and I'd sort of got, is this my trajectory? Is that where I'm going to graduate to in a decade? I'm going to have to play that woman who doesn't say a thing when her son kind of harangues her and says, you've no right to be having sex with anybody at your age. And, you know, I thought, if I really got, is that the path? And so I wrote a justification for Gertrude, and I've so enjoyed it that I went on to, you know, write 5 more, and then I thought, oh, maybe I could do a book.
Maybe there's a book in this. Gertrude does have that moment. I'm digressing from the path that I thought that I was on. She does have that moment, I pray you, my lady, do not drink. And she does drink,
yeah.
And it's the poisoned goblet. When she does finally assert herself, it's for her doom, isn't it?
Well, it's wonderful that she's an example of somebody who you realise from that speech and from growing through the play, you realise she's twigging, she's getting it. She's getting what's really happened. You know, she's understanding who Claudius is, but she doesn't get to say anything about it. Her longest speech is about Ophelia.
Yes. Somebody who doesn't get that, it always strikes me at the end of Romeo and Juliet, in Juliet's tomb, and everybody's dying. The nurse isn't even there, and she's so fundamental to...
Yeah.
Do you think, again, this is digression, do you think that's because the boy playing the nurse had another role, and so he couldn't be there as well?
Yes, I mean, I think that when we sort of write, you know, people have written tomes about Shakespeare and studying him, and sometimes something very practical and down to earth is the reason why something, you know, a doubling up happened, or people didn't do... you know, I've got lots of theories about why there aren't very many parts for women over 30. One is that the young pretty boys moved on to playing men. And also in the sort of, when women did come on stage in the sort of Charles II era, and from then on, they were considered sort of borderline harlots. And the way to get respectability was to marry one of your fans in the audience who was a rich young gentleman and become Lady Muck, and you know, so your career would end.
Yes.
And so that's one of my theories about why there aren't any older women actors.
So it's a practical outcome of demographics, society, values, morality. Lots of your characters fight that. I wonder, can we hear from the witches? Do you think? I think that would be a good idea. So, and witches obviously are outside of society, aren't they? They, whether they're genuinely witches who command the supernatural, or whether they are simply referred to as witches because they don't fit the role that society has assigned to women. In your version, it's a witch's rap, isn't it? It's
reclaiming the O word, basically. And I can read you, there are a lot of verses, but I'll read you maybe 3 that sort of punctuate it. So the first one is... whiskers, wrinkles, bags that wobble, hags in rags with legs that hobble, chins are double, pricked with stubble, brains befuddled, minds a muddle, living in our babbling bubble, blamed for every trial and trouble, when all we are is old. And then there's a middle one that says, we weren't always old. Our memories are quiet wells, deep, rich waters, echoing bells, love tokens, smiles and summer smells, our minds expanding in their shells, our brains protective citadels, not almanacs for casting spells. We're like you, but just old.
Beautiful.
And the last sentence is, "'Tis better far that you befriend the signs foreshadowing your end. Know that your back will surely bend, that certain breaks will never mend. Your voice may squeak, your breath offend. Embrace all this if you intend to treasure every day you spend. Unless you die too young, my friend, one day you will be old."
Fantastic. On the front of She Speaks, which is available for purchase after this event, and could potentially be signed by the author, Joanna Lumley says it is stunning, astonishing. It is, it's fantastic to get these glimpses of the netherworld, of the actor's imagination. And you said in your excellent answer just now that the genesis of this book is moments when you were on stage listening, not speaking. Hence the title. Did you actually, at the RSC, for example, did you start composing things that you would like to say, or knowing that you would never get the chance?
No, I never sort of did any writing, really. I suppose I compartmentalised myself. I'm an actor and I don't write. And then sort of after my 50s, when...
So not long ago.
Last week, somebody said to me, you know, you really should write a book. And I went, nah. And then they said, no, but you should. And every time I met this person, she said, where's that book?
Was it an agent by any chance?
It was an agent.
That's publishing, everybody.
And so I then started, and then it sort of poured out of me, and I realised I had got something to say. But I think you might think this, that women in general still, you feel you've got to be legitimately invited to do something. You know, you don't feel that you've got a worthwhile thing
You
to
can't
contribute.
hustle for it?
Well, not in my case, anyway. I mean, perhaps the generation after me are better at that. But, you know, there was Ken Branagh, aged 12, writing his autobiographic. You know, there was Tony Sher, Simon Callow. They were all writing their books. And this woman said, you should write for the women, you know. And that gave me a sort of, I needed a justification.
Sure.
Well, I'll do it for them, you know, instead of, well, I want to write a book.
Did you a couple of years ago, I was watching Love's Labour's Lost, I think it was. Jacquinetta, who is one of those sort of barmaid, milkmaid type characters who tend to disappear from the action. And I remember after the interval that somebody says, oh, she's married Don Armado. And that was it. Right? So she's not there in Act 2. Yeah. She's just gone.
Yeah.
Right.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you're not one of those voluptuous marriageable women, then you're the nurse, or I guess you're Lady Capulet, who doesn't have much to say.
Well, there are very few mother-daughter relationships, and that struck me that, you know, so I wrote a piece for Lady Capulet because she has 2 lines when her daughter's dead at the end of the play.
It's so tragic,
you
isn't
know,
it?
and you go, what? And there's masses of Capulet ranting on. And, sorry. And so I just, it just keeps happening. And of course, it should be unnecessary for me to preface this by saying I adore, worship, venerate William Shakespeare. But I do have to say that sometimes because people think I'm being cheeky and I'm, you know, telling him off. But actually, it's simply that a man of his age, at his time in history, was shining the mirror up to nature, and it was a very male image. And I'm just trying to pull the mirror a little bit this way and look, you know, because there's nothing, you know, he wrote such brilliant parts for women. He just, they don't sort of motor the plot usually, and their story isn't central.
So here's an example of somebody who is central, but she doesn't appear. Sycorax, Caliban's mother in The Tempest. And that follows on from those wonderful verses you read from your witch's poem about being old. It's almost the best story in The Tempest, is Sycorax's story, isn't it?
Yes, that's very interesting. I'd not really thought about it. I've written a piece for Caliban, which you'd think shouldn't be in the book because he is a he.
That's where I was leading on.
Yeah.
So can you tell us why you wanted something for Caliban? It does celebrate his mother in a sense, doesn't it?
It says, I sicken the Sycorax. That's all I... But he's sort of... I suppose I'm writing also for a time when gender isn't quite so clearly defined. And Caliban, for me, is an outsider of any kind who is put to work and is angry and doesn't get to explain why he's angry, or they are angry. And I think it was partly to do with the fact that we'd done an all-female Tempest, and sort of searing into my head was the image of this actress, Sophie Stanton, playing Caliban. And it was very hard to cast. It's very hard to cast Caliban or the witches in this modern context, in our day and age, because who are these magic figures, and who are we frightened of? And so it was sort of finding, and the person that we created was neither male nor female, but was angry, and it was like about sort of unconvertible fury that you had to sort of deal with, and also Prospero, who's able to forgive everybody, all his enemies, but cannot forgive Caliban. You know,
it's
somehow
crazy
can't love
it?
him.
It's absolutely crazy that, and he can forgive everybody because he's wealthy and powerful. Of course, we can't neglect that. But very interestingly, in Harriet's wonderful book, not only are there these lyrics or sonnets or poems of all kinds, raps. There are brilliant introductions which give us the background to the inspiration for each one. And that's quite pivotal, isn't it? That all-female production. Was it the Donmar?
It started at the Donmar. We did Julius Caesar back in 2011, and it went down surprisingly well. And we were rather dreading the reaction, but it went down very well. So then we did another one, and we decided on Henry IV because it's such a sort of all-inclusive, panoramic.
Did you feel that the rehearsal room, the dressing rooms, did you feel the theatre was a different place? I once interviewed Odeline de la Martinez, who's a Cuban conductor, and she said an all-female orchestra is a different thing.
Yes. I mean, we've only got to imagine it. Yes, it just has a different vibe. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I feel freer amongst lots of women than I do amongst lots of men. And also, if you're in a conventional Shakespeare play, there's only 3 of you and 15 men. You know, that's the way it's structured. And also, lots of so often women don't get to meet one another on stage. You know, they're in different parts of the plot. And
yes.
So I've brought some women together from different plays because I thought they ought to meet. You know, Hermione meets Imogen, and they go on about. I think it's called. We strumpets must stick together.
It's so clever, that.
So, and there's another one where Mariana and Diana from 2 different plays meet about sharing, the bed trick and things like that.
But those things work because you have such a deep understanding of those characters. Something slightly more abstract is the verses on time that you've written, which are... it's literally on time. So we are on page 97. I wonder if you could read that for us.
Yes, I mean, this is Cressida, who's such a puzzling character. I tried to set up... It was much easier to write the interior life of a character I'd played, but I'd never played Cressida, and I thought, she's problematic, and I thought, how do you... So I kind of avoided the issue and made her... I sort of used the fact that she talks to the audience very wisely and seems to be very clued up and almost modern. And then he abandons her, unfortunately. Oh. So I thought, what would Cressida have to say to us now? From ancient seabed I come up for air, swimming from my century to yours. Find water drops have merely brushed the stones. Still women weep, while men still go to wars unwinnable, pick cities to the bone. Their displaced people, sick and in despair, turned back from borders like a beating tide that has no choice but stronger to return. And in this havoc, hearts grow thick with hate, turned inward or displayed in proud parades, too often misdirected against the slaves and not the unseen hand that holds the chain. Though you have told yourselves that much has changed, the topsoil shifts, the twisted roots remain.
That's absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Sensational. If somebody had read that to me and said, this is an undiscovered early poem by W.H. Auden, I'd say, yes, it is. I can hear exactly what you mean. Last thing, could you, before I asked Vikki about Miss Veal and Miss Ham, could you tell me how you became so adept with the meter and rhyme of poetry?
Well, as I said, it came spilling out quite quickly because I think in my subconscious I'd been thinking in that meter. I love playing with words. I've been a punster since I was at school. I've got some school friends in the audience who probably remember me making puns. I love rhymes and chimes, and I just enjoy that. And I've always sort of played with poetry, but I think, I mean, I don't try and imitate. I don't say quoth he and say, ye. I don't do Shakespearean language. It's just really the rhythms of thought that I've absorbed through him.
So something from that sonnet form, the war's unwinnable, is just such a beautiful inversion that is married perfectly with the meter of what you've written.
Thank you.
Vikki, I'm going to come on to you with that very same question. Your book, Miss Veal and Miss Ham, is written with an attention to the rhythm of dialogue and the rhythm of the narration, which is poetic too. And is that something that you knew you were doing as you were writing?
Not at all, no. It's very kind of you to say that. I love writing dialogue. I find character through dialogue, and I really enjoy subtext. And I suppose that was one of the reasons why I really enjoyed writing these two characters, because they've been in a relationship for a very long time. They're very deeply
before
in
we
love.
come on to the actual story, can we stay with this style for a moment? Because it is really remarkable, and when you read shortly, we'll hear it aloud. Can you just say what you mean by the subtext, the unsaid in your dialogues?
It's the things that are not said that I find the most interesting. And I suppose in a long-term relationship, that's it for me. That's what I wanted to really analyse and explore. And I'm told by people who've read other things that I've written that is something about my style, that my dialogue is full of subtext.
So
my father was a writer, and I don't know, I mean, for television, and wrote a lot of original plays and then did book adaptations. So I think I've probably spent my life absorbing dialogue in a way that perhaps doesn't happen to everybody through
So
their childhood.
another stylistic judgment that we might use is that it's a film, although it's a domestic novel, it also feels filmic. And I was talking to your husband Clive earlier about your father adapting The Jewel in the Crown, the Paul Scott quartet. So did you absorb that as well, a way of storytelling that relies on visuals?
I guess I must have done. I certainly absorbed the importance of plot and the importance of character. And we would walk along and talk about the complexity of how to get things across in quite short, tight ways, because he would be struggling with something. I think I write scenes, although I have to say, and I mean, you teach writing for theatre. I've only attempted to write something once. It was absolutely terrible. So I'm really, I can't...
Actors can work wonders, you know.
Well, yeah,
Up to a point.
Up to a point. But the novel form is the thing that really interests me, but I love writing dialogue within the novel form. And just as in a musical, you know, a song must move the plot ahead. A song cannot just be there for the sake of being a song. It has to actually do something to the character or move the story through. I want my scenes to mean something. Everything that is said has a reason for being said, even though the individual who's saying it has no idea why.
So, like for Harriet, I must ask the question, what was the first inspiration for Miss Veal and Miss Ham? What was the first nugget? And you thought, there's a story here.
Your answer was so good, because I wanted to write a short story, because I was doing a creative writing MA at Goldsmiths at the time, and I hadn't got anything else to submit, so I thought, I better write a short story. And I wanted to write a story about love in old age, and I wanted to write about a love that couldn't really speak its name, a love that was struggling. And when I was at school, and I was taught by some extraordinarily wonderful women who I began to realize as I was growing up were, of course, lesbians. But it was never discussed or talked about. They didn't live these lives openly. And so I wanted to write about them. The book is actually dedicated to Rosemary Manning, who was my headmistress at St. Christopher's School, who was a lesbian who came out finally on British television at the age of 70, when she had written several sapphic novels, and she also wrote Green Smoke, the children's stories, which I read when I was at school with her. So I wanted to write about these women who were real contributors to society, but were in many, many cases living as publicly companions and privately as lovers. So that was the sort of original inspiration for it.
And did you therefore choose your moment in history?
Yes.
As a function of that?
Yes, I wanted to. In fact, everything I write seems to be set at a moment, and the moment that I chose for this was as things were really coming out of the Second World War. Rationing had come largely to an end, but sweet shops were still being rationed. It's set in a sweet shop and post office. Post offices were going through an enormous amount of reorganisation at the end of the First World War. And yet those little shops that I knew very well from my childhood, those small village sweet shops and post offices, run in my case by the diminutive Mrs. Johns, who ran separate hours for the sweet shop and the post office. I wanted to write about those villages where time and things were changing so quickly at the end of the Second World War. There was the nascent welfare state, but it wasn't really capturing everybody. I didn't realize until I'd written the short story that, in fact, I was really writing about what turns out to be the first post office scandal. I only discovered this after I had set it at this time. But Beatrix Veal is one of the women who volunteered in the First World War to go and run one of these sub-post offices because the men were being sent off to war. And she was put on a temporary contract. You get accommodation, you get the little shop, and she moves there with her partner, Dora, who runs the sweet shop side of the business. But in the reorganisation at the end of the Second World War, which, as you may or may not know, through Act of Parliament, women had to give up their jobs to men, the returning men from the war, a lot of the sub-post offices that had formed such an important part of the war effort in the First and Second World War, millions of letters getting to the trenches in the First World War particularly.
And sometimes several times a day.
And sometimes several times a day. Were closed down. And a lot of the women who had signed up on temporary contracts were, in that lovely phrase, let go, with no pension and then no home. Yeah. And this story starts on the day where all the pigeons have finally come home to roost. There is no post office for Beatrice anymore.
You have a lovely reading that we chose earlier, setting that for today's audience, that moment in history. The end of the war, its repercussions. Could you read that for us now, please?
So which one is this, Greg?
One moment. Could I borrow somebody's glasses? Yes, it is page 8.
Great.
Yes.
I was about to have to borrow my husband's glasses, actually.
Beginning with general election. So in capitals, okay, because it's the headline in the paper.
Because this is, in fact, just about to come. She's sorting out the newspapers at the start of what is to be their last day in the shop. General election, too close to call, said the Times. Although Attlee was a fool, Churchill was a spent old drunk of a man. Britain strong and free was his headline slogan, with endless leery carping about the need to maintain our traditional ways of life. Try living my traditional way of life, Mr. Churchill. Just you try it, she thought. Elections are a lot of fuss about nothing, her father's voice in her head, dismissing all politics. But Beatrix and Dora marched for votes for women, so fussing was in their nature. Though they had been slow starters, they became enamoured with the importance of the cause, or perhaps, more accurately, the possibility of the success of the cause. Increasingly educated in the ways of dissent and the refusal to accept the status quo at tea parties with friends or friends of friends, they graduated to watching from the rear the braver souls throwing eggs at passing politicians. And of course they were suffragists, not suffragettes, which is a point they make very firmly later on to a young, ignorant woman who comes into the shop.
It's a wonderful passage setting the scene. I know if Kate were here, she would say to you, she would ask you a question about writing at a hinge moment in history when things are changing. Amongst your secondary characters, you have other outsiders, people who muddle through. They find a path, but they're not fully accepted by society. Yeah. Where did that come from for you as a writer to be such an important concern?
I really wanted to write about the prejudice that's in small villages and towns, that's there in plain sight, that everybody knows what's going on really, but they choose to ignore it. And in fact, I had quoted to me the other day from a couple of lesbian ladies who had read the book and came up to me at a book signing to say that they lived and experienced exactly the experience now that Beatrice and Dora were living in the 1950s. It's not something that has gone away. And so I also do have their gay male friend, Oliver, who lives in the village, who writes novels under a pseudonym, which was Primus Qualcast. And I have to say that I chose Primus Qualcast as his name because my godfather had a secret life as a knitting pattern mannequin. You know, those
How
photographs
wonderful.
of those men for knitting patterns
Wonderful.
in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And he did this work under the name of Primus Qualcast. And I thought, I've got to use this at
That's
some
a
point in my life.
fantastic
So
tribute.
that's why Oliver is called
I
Primus.
love that tribute to him. So they're trapped. Miss
They're
Veal
trapped.
and Miss Ham are trapped by the changing demographics, the men returning from the war, the nascent welfare state, which clearly is a good thing, but for them it's not. That sort of narrative conundrum is brilliant for a novel.
Exactly, something that starts with a crisis, and for which there is no real way out apart from to live separately. And you know, I've experienced this through my friends and family. As you're getting older, this also becomes a real issue. If one of you has to go into a home, and Dora dreads going to a home because that's the old workhouse as far as she's concerned. But they really can't move together out of this little house, which has the shop with it, and stay as a couple. And so the tension of this is what they have been denying right up till this moment when the bailiffs are about to arrive.
We have another short extract on page 55, because one of the things I wanted to make sure that you all know about this novel is its depth of understanding of human character and motivation, and how it drills deeply down into the souls of these two women and the people around them, who, some allies, some indifferent, some actively, you have to say, they're enemies. So I hope this little extract will reveal some of that.
So this is set in the shop. The novel is told from the perspective of Beatrix all the way through, and it does take place just over 24 hours in this day. She hesitated for a second before placing her hand on Dora's face. An electric shock passed between the two. 34 years of dissembling, of being shop smart, wiped away by a forbidden gesture. Plenty of men and women looked at you with longing, but they never had a chance with me around. Dora's button brown eyes investigated Beatrix's grey-green ones, and she smiled. Sticks and stones, darling.
So you see, don't you, that lovely, beautifully chosen writerly repetition that you can hear in Vicki's delivery. As an actor would deliver it, the repetition slowing the line so you feel the weight of it. It's true, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing, isn't it, about if you... because it is a book that has lots of challenge and difficulties in it. But they and I find a lot of humour through that. I mean, I love doing that in my writing, is that, you know, yes, it's really, as you do, it's why these are so perfectly matched together, because there's an awful lot of humour in getting old. There's an awful lot of humour in living together with somebody for 45 years and being, you know, that commonality that you get is the thing that I think I wanted to really celebrate in this book.
And when circumstances are against you, it's good to keep your chin up and make fun of those circumstances.
Yeah.
But then there's the depth of this enduring love between them. As you were writing it, did that grow for you, or was it there from the very beginning?
It grew for me, I think. I mean, Beatrix came first, if you like, which is why I wanted to write through her eyes. But and through her, I became more and more in love with Dora. At the beginning, I thought Dora was a bit of pain in the neck, really, because she's quite self-centered
and more diffident.
and more diffident, and she's still overdoing the slap at coming downstairs in her high-heeled shoes. You know, she's really still working it, and I liked Beatrix with her much more kind of straightforward attitude to life, and looking after the garden and the hens and all the rest of it, and really keeping the whole home going. But in the end, I've become really in love with both of them because Dora is such a wonderful character, and her pleasure in life is what gives you
Now,
a lot
one or
of
two
fun in the
decades ago, you began your own career in theatre, which led to all of those august positions that I itemised in the introduction. And you were at the RSC at the same time as Harriet. Am I right in that?
That's right.
So
I was a deputy stage manager, so I was just really learning my stuff. The deputy stage manager is the person who calls all the cues and sits in the rehearsal and writes down all the moves and creates the prompt copy and all of that. And it was my first really big job as a deputy stage manager.
It's an amazing apprenticeship.
In walks this young, talented actress, along with lots of other...
Who didn't think she was young and talented.
How can that be?
And we ended up on Broadway.
Why didn't we know?
Did you know... So what were you playing in the show?
I was playing Helena in All's Well that Ends Well, which is it's pretty deep-endish. I was thrown in the deep end. It was really my first big Shakespeare role. Yeah. Trevor Nunn directing, Peggy Ashcroft, and you know, I mean, it was it's sort of dream come true, but also the most terrifying make or break moment.
Was there a distance between you because of the structure of theatre that you didn't know one another? You were. We
didn't pal up because I mean, you are sort of in little tribes in a way because your hours are different and your concerns are different, and but we have to sort of work with one another. I think where did you train as a stage manager in a drama school?
Yeah,
sort of thing?
Central School.
I remember I was at Lambda and there was the course of stage management, and we went on tour in our third year. And I got rather hysterical because there were ladders in my tights and I had to do a dance with tights. I can't remember what the story was. And I was going, oh my God, I haven't got da. And the stage manager came and slapped me on the face.
No.
And
in the end, you have to.
And I thought, my God, this is what they're being taught. You will get hysterical actors and what you have to do is slap them in the face. But so that was the old school of teaching. She never had to do that with me. But,
maybe that's why they taught us how to stage fight slap. I can't remember really. But it was, I mean, it was, wasn't it, for both of us, the most brilliant experience. And you are learning on the job. You really are.
Absolutely.
And being picked up as well and taken to America and landing on Broadway. We were laughing earlier about the fact that the poster had to say, from the writer who brought you Romeo and Juliet, because they thought... no one would know. I mean,
can't put Shakespeare on the poster; it'll die.
I don't know if it's true, but I was told that the movie *The Madness of King George III*, in the States, was *The Madness of King George*, so people didn't think it was a sequel, and they missed the first two.
Yeah. It's completely true.
Is that true?
Completely true.
Good heavens above! So there you are on Broadway, having a wonderful time.
Yeah.
Yes. And did it feel like a completely different world from what you knew in the UK? Very
different. I remember we got the Edward Booth Prize. Do you remember that? The RSC. And we had to be there at the presentation. And I remember Philip Franks, who was wonderfully articulate, was our spokesperson when we accepted the prize. And he said, rather frighteningly, I mean, rather bravely, he criticised the purely commercial ethos of Broadway, and that by comparison we had various concessionary packages. We had, you know, people going into schools and trying to win new audiences all around the country. We had a repertory system and a subsidised national theatre and all of that stuff. And the Schubert organisation, who'd put us on, sat in the front and dreaded to put the word Shakespeare on the poster. They heard that, and I saw them looking at one another like, he's for the chop, you know. Because there was...
I was probably just fainting in the wings.
I think it still is true that on the whole, America is more purely commercial. You know, if it doesn't make a profit, we won't do it, and we'll take it off after 2 weeks.
You say that, but if
Sorry.
But if I was investing, I don't know, investing in Ed Hall's new show in Chicago, £20,000, whatever, I could set it against my taxes, couldn't I?
Well, that's why, I think that's how All's Well got funded, they say, was through people wanting to make a tax break, tax loss. And,
I mean, the maths in America are completely different from here. I mean, they don't have the Arts Council, and we should say thank goodness for the Arts
Exactly.
Council, because it does make an enormous amount of difference to how work starts out and the price of your ticket when you're going to see shows in subsidised theatre. Whereas, of course, in America, and particularly right through America, but mostly, I mean, there are some charitably funded organisations, but those are all done through donations. And on Broadway, I mean, it costs you 3 times more to put a show on Broadway than it does in the UK. So the whole thing is overheated. And it is quite a shock to come out of, the lovely warm bath that is Stratford-upon-Avon with its very subsidised environment to suddenly be put on a stage where... I did have a wonderful phone call one day, though, because the stage doorman called me down and said, there's a woman on the phone and she needs to know the name of the character of the guy in Titus Andronicus, the black guy in Titus Andronicus. She's on the phone now. And I said, Aaron the Moor. He went, thank you very much. And you think, she's rung the stage door of the theatre
Oh, I see.
to ask them the name of a character that's not even in the play, but I happen to be running past her when it's Aaron the Moor.
Fantastic.
That's what you would do on Broadway. I'll just ring the theatre where the Shakespeare show is on. They'll be able to tell us the name of that Shakespeare
Like
show.
you're phone a friend on Millionaire. Did you meet again at the Royal Court or at the RSC or elsewhere?
We've bumped into one another over the years very frequently, really. But one of my images of Vikki is wearing a yellow hard hat on a building site during the renovation of probably the Royal Court.
Yeah.
But it also could have been the RST. Honestly, without plugging too much, I'm sure it was down to you. The spirit of those spaces was preserved and helped all the way through. And, the Royal Court, you go in and it's still the same Royal Court,
Yes.
but it's much, it's much better preserved and much better built. And ditto with the RST. They're really, the sensitivity about the environment that
And the
you were
third
changing.
house at the RSC as well. That's an incredible achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. So and you do need someone who's. It's great that you were working in the theatre behind the scenes, and it wasn't all done by architects, or entirely exclusively by architects. I remember we were sort of consulted before the RST big change, and we sort of threw our pennyworth in, and they did consult stage management, directors, designers, critics. There was a lot of consultation, and it made a big difference.
Now, in a moment, we'll have 10 minutes for questions from the audience. But before we do so, Vikki, what are you writing now?
I'm writing a novel which is set in Bolton at the end of the 40s, at the time really when the cotton industry is beginning to collapse, and the world order is about to change again. It's actually set in the theatre, though, in a
repertory
version
theatre,
of
yes?
A repertory theatre where a production of Othello is about to be put on. And it's the relationship between the mill owner's wife and the actor playing Othello that is the central part of
The mill owner's wife and the actor, is that an illicit relationship that you're writing?
No, it's a friendship, and they both experience life-changing moments during this period of time, which in this particular novel is 2 weeks, and it's the way in which those two changing experiences interact. I cannot talk about it coherently at all, because I'm three-quarters of I'm three-quarters of the way through it, and I don't know, it's very, very difficult when you're in the middle of sort of gestating this thing, because I actually really don't quite know what's going to happen at the end.
Clive told me you know exactly what's going to happen.
So I can't quite, I really can't say what it's about at the moment. It's
I think
about
that was
all
enough.
sorts of things.
I know
but
that
that's where
my
it's
mum
set.
is looking forward to another voluptuous gulp.
Yeah, I'm looking
obviously.
forward to her next.
I meant to say earlier that the 24-hour timescale of Miss Veal and Miss Ham is one of the things also that makes it filmic.
That's what I think is so amazing. You pack so much into what actually takes place over a day or a 24-hour period, and now you're saying 2 weeks. And
hang on, somebody's calling us. Harriet, what are you writing next? And I hope something very soon.
I'm way earlier in the process than you. I'm not three-quarters, I'm barely a quarter. Right. And I'm doing, I think I'm a sprinter. I'd love to one day write a novel, but I'm writing...
Kate is a sprinter.
Yeah, I'm writing short stories, but they're sort of loosely... It's funny, because I thought my working title was Backstory, because it's about, you know, they're different stories that are the backstory to roles I've played, right? And then I Googled and I saw that David Mitchell had written a book called Backstory. It was his memoir.
But maybe your book will get confused
Yvette
with
Cooper's written She Speaks, but without the exclamation mark. So, so it's basically I've taken various stories behind the parts I've played.
Fantastic. And when
but
you
you're
say
also doing Julius Caesar again, aren't you?
Reviving Julius Caesar. I'm not going to write his backstory, but yeah. But,
I think we know it, don't we? So, thank you very much for your excellent answers to my hopefully useful questions.
Very good questions.
If we could have the house lights up so that we can see the people asking us, that would be handy. And who would like to ask a question of our fantastic interviewees today? And I'll just say in passing, I used to be a school teacher, so I can wait. The lady here on the right-hand side.
Vikki, you talked about dialogue. I wondered how you got into the lingo of the 50s in your dialogue, the kind of language and expressions they used at that time.
I wanted to write in it, and I'm writing again in it in 47, because it's the language of my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. And I'm missing it, and I love it. So that's why I naturally find it very easy to write in that way. I remember my aunt saying to me, I picked up the phone, my dad was staying with her, and she said, "Your father has got me quite squiffy." And I thought, exactly, that's wonderful. There is no other word than squiffy.
It's a lovely, characteristic word. Do we have another question? Yes, please. The mic is just coming.
Question to both of you. If there's any book that's been written or published that you wish you'd have written, what would it be?
Apart from the books of Kate Mosse. So, leaving aside my wife's books, is there a book that you wish you'd written?
Off the top of my head, I'd love to have written Atonement in the queue.
Which, of course, you were in, weren't you?
Some people find it irritating. A few people find it irritating and self-conscious, but I think it's so clever. And it explores the mind of a 13-year-old girl, which was about the age I was when I remember sort of having a mind that I thought was interesting to explore. I think it's a brilliant book about writing.
Did you know how much you would love the book when you were cast?
Well, I read it anyway.
Right.
Then I read it again when I was cast. And we were talking about, you know, the difference between reading and seeing, and there's a whole chapter on my character's sort of internal life. In the film, she's just lying on a bed. You know, you can't convey any of that.
It's hard when you lose that.
It wasn't a joy to play.
Okay.
And then I read the audiobook. I had to read and reading the audiobook, I thought, God, you know, unless you read this twice, you're not going to get these little subtle hints that this is written by the writer. You know, it's very cleverly layered, and I just think it's both clever and sort of emotionally quite evocative.
I totally agree. Vikki, what about you? If you could turn
Alice
back
in
time...
Wonderland. I always go back to the books that I read or were read to me when I was young. And yeah, I mean, I'm toying up between that and Winnie the Pooh. But to be able to write in that way is just wonderful. I was so lost in those books when I was little.
So is it writing for children, or is it the freedom of the surreal stories?
It's the surreal stories, the language, the poetry that's included within it, the meter, the clever, the playing with words. It's just... And I mean, well, Milne and his lovely characters, you know, the Eeyore, the Piglet, the Kangaroo, the characterization in those books and in Alice in Wonderland is just wonderful.
You're completely right, of course. I wish I'd said that.
Oh, I was thinking I wish I'd said Ian McEwan.
Maybe there'll be another question, and you can... Yes, lady in the front row. Oh no, you've gone by.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Sarah.
Well, it's not really a question, so I don't want to be like one of those.
Oh, it could be a
mansplainers.
fascinating observation.
It's a fact, yeah. It's just a thank you, really. So this is a bit gushy. But when I was 17, I went to my first proper theatre, which was the RSC at Stratford for my English A-level. And you were Malfi. And I don't know if you were a stage manager then, but I wanted to say I think that really changed me. I'm a writer, I do the event before now. And in fact, my 5th novel, there's an epigraph from Malfi, and Malfi is a theme throughout the play. She says, I am Duchess. It's called Reputation. And she says, I am Duchess of Malfi still. I think that's the quote, isn't it?
That's exactly it. It's the most powerful line.
And I just remember seeing you standing on the stage, and it's one of those really visceral moments. Sorry, I'm getting quite emotional talking about it. And that I've just written another book in which I thought about you as well when I was writing it. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
And that just shows the power, doesn't it?
But can I ask you, Harriet, about that moment? Because it is the moment at which everything has fallen apart and been taken from her when she says, I am a Duchess of Malfi still. Mm-hmm. And it's extraordinary. You must have relished that moment every night.
Well, I didn't, because it's a bit like a Hamburg. It's like it's a very famous line, and you're coming up to it and you're going, oh God, I've got to say that in a minute, So it's not my favourite line to say, but it was a brilliant clue as to what was going on in her heart and what was happening to her.
She reasserts herself in that moment.
To herself as well.
Yes. Because
if you're stripped of everything and you're robbed of everything that is your identity and that you think is your identity, and you think of people who are tortured in prison cells or whatever, and how you're just hanging on saying, whatever else, I'm still that person. You can't take that away from me. And it informed the rest of the performance back retrospectively, but I did not like saying that line.
What about you, Vikki? Is there a moment like that in one of the many plays that you worked on that has that resonance for you? I should have warned her.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's a difficult question.
It's impossible to say. I mean, I have to say, Peggy Ashcroft in that part as the Countess was quite brilliant. Yes, I mean, and the opportunity to be that close and watching somebody night after night doing that. I mean, all actors who are really good actors have this extraordinary ability to say night after night after night a line as if they're saying it for the first time. And that was what would keep me going, because often sitting in the prompt corner on number 175 performance of, it's getting quite repetitive. But the minute that the show would start, out they would come. And
but you experienced that too as a writer,
it.
because you finish your first draft, and then it's a second, and then there's a third, and then there's a fourth, and so on. And you have to come fresh to it every time. Isn't that so?
You absolutely do. And reading it, it's lovely that you say in your book, please read this out loud.
Yes.
Because I would spend days reading.
You have to read it out.
You have to read your writing out loud. It's a completely different experience to the reading of it.
I think it was Auden who said that there is no good poem that isn't better read aloud.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Although poets are often really bad at reading their own poems. I mean, I know that's a gross phenomenon, and I've just read my book very badly, but it's true. It's and hearing your own work coming out of somebody else's mouth is absolutely extraordinary.
I find it terrifying, but
I think that is the true gift of a brilliant performer, though, is someone that can say those lines as if nobody has ever said them before, and they are at the front of their brain as fresh thought.
And Peggy Ashcroft was the bugger who said, I am Duchess of Malfi still, in such a memorable way that it kept being thrown down my throat.
It's true.
So we are finishing on those thoughts about constant renewal of that creative instinct, that creative urge, that brilliant inspired delivery, whether it's draft after draft of a book in both of your cases, or in performance for you. And obviously, Vikki and Harriet have mirrored that today in this wonderful session. So, dames all, there is nothing like a dame. Thank you very much.
Thank you.